Hello, I'm Robin. Welcome to Bookspin. And today I thought I'd try something a little different. I have watched a few people on BookTube who are taking the Round the World Reading Challenge, in which they try to read as many books as possible from different countries or from authors from different countries. And while this is not something that I'm taking part in myself, it did get me thinking just how international are my reading habits? How much have I read from around the world? And specifically in relation to science fiction, because that's what this channel is about. So I thought I'd turn this into an interesting kind of game. And basically, the way it works is you can get points for books you've read from different countries. So, very simple. One book per country. If you have read a book by an author from that country, you can give yourself 3 points. If you've read a book which is set within that country, even though the author is not from there, you can give yourself 2 points. But if you've not read a book from that country, but there is a book that you want to read, i.e. it's in your TBR, and it's from an author from that country, or it's just a book set within that country, you can allow yourself 1 point. So there you go. That's basically the rules. When I say TBR, I think in my case I'm going to say a book which is on my bookshelf, or it's on my Amazon wish list, or my Goodreads profile, something that I genuinely want to read. So I'm going to see how many countries I can build up, how many points I can accumulate, and feel free to take part in this yourself. So I won't talk too much about each book because otherwise we'll be here all day. But let's get started. We're going to work our way from the Western Hemisphere and kind of go eastwards. So I'm going to start off with North America, and continent by continent, let's see how many countries I can get points for each continent. So North America, I'm going to start off with Canada, and I couldn't find any Canadian writers that I've read so far within sci-fi. But there is this book, Spin by Robert Charles Wilson, which I haven't read yet, but I really do want to read. Robert Charles Wilson is a Canadian-American writer, and this is a Hugo Award-winning novel. I don't know a lot about it, but everything that I've heard about it is great. There's so many glowing reviews out there of this book. So that's definitely one of my TBR. 1 point for that. For the United States, I'd go for The Martian Chronicles or The Silver Locusts by Ray Bradbury, an absolutely classic 1950s American fix-up novel set on Mars. I read and reviewed this recently. I gave it 5 stars. Mexico. I've not read any Mexican sci-fi authors, but I do have this book in my collection, The Daughter of Dr. Moreau by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. I believe this author is a Mexican-American writer, and this book, I think this novel may well be set within Mexico as well. It's obviously there's some connection here with H.G. Wells, the Island of Dr. Moreau. Don't know much about it, but it is on my bookshelf, so 1 point for that. In addition to the 3 points for The Martian Chronicles. One more book, one more country for North America, Cuba. A Planet for Rent by Yoss. I don't own this book, but it is in my wish list. It's a modern satirical science fiction novel, I believe, and it's by a Cuban writer, so that's going to represent Cuba for 1 point. So that means we've got 6 points so far. 4 countries for North America. Now, South America, not a lot here, I'm afraid. I couldn't think of any South American writers, but I have read one book set within South America, which has got sci-fi elements, and that would be Galapagos by Kurt Vonnegut. He's an American writer, which is set within the Galapagos Islands, which are part of Ecuador. And this is a very funny book. I don't own a copy, unfortunately, but I would like to read this book again at some point. 2 points for Ecuador. And that's it for South America. For Europe, I've got a lot more going on. And I'm going to allow myself some more points by splitting up the United Kingdom into its 4 constituent countries. Why not? Let's start off with England, and another absolute classic of 1950s science fiction, The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham. This is a classic apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic book, and I absolutely love this particular cover, which really shows off its horror vibes. So 3 points for that. Representing Wales, we've got the Welsh writer Alistair Reynolds, who's one of my favourite writers. His first book, Revelation Space, which is an epic space opera and the first part of a series. So 3 points for Wales. Scotland. I don't think I've actually read any Scottish sci-fi writers, but I do have this book on my bookshelf, The Night Sessions by Ken MacLeod. And Ken MacLeod is quite a well-known modern Scottish science fiction writer. I picked this book up just recently at a library sale for just 10 pence. So that would be a TBR book for 1 point. Northern Ireland next. Northern Irish writer Bob Shaw. This is the first book of his that I read, and it's called 1 Million Tomorrows. And this is a very interesting, a very far-fetched story set within the future, in which immortality has become freely available as a vaccine. So you can just get one injection and you become immortal. Moving on to Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, A Brilliant Void. This is an anthology. It says a selection of classic Irish science fiction. I have read this one, and it's quite an interesting collection. It's most of the stories are pretty old. It's mostly 19th century, early 20th century stuff, and the authors are not very well known, but it's an interesting collection. Moving on to France, one of the first books that I reviewed on this channel is Planet of the Apes by Pierre Boulle. And I love this one. Very interesting, quite different to the movies. Give this book a try. 3 points for France. Italy. Italo Calvino, well-known Italian writer. Another book which I reviewed for this channel, Cosmicomics, which is a very bizarre, very humorous short story collection. 3 points. Now we've got this book, War with the Newts. I haven't read it yet. It's by a Czech writer, Karel Čapek, and this originally came out in the 1930s, and it's got elements of military science fiction, and it's supposed to be a humorous allegory on European 20th century politics of the time. So that will be an interesting one to read, I think. 1 point. Poland. Solaris. Probably Stanislav Lem's most famous novel. This is a very interesting and thought-provoking philosophical science fiction book. 3 points for Poland. Another Eastern European one, Self-Discovery by Vladimir Semchenko. Quite an obscure title, I think. This book's long out of print, and it's the only novel which was translated into English by Savchenko. I did enjoy this one, so 3 points for Ukraine. And then next up, we've got This Immortal by Roger Zelazny, representing Greece, because some of this book is set on Greece, although Zelazny is an American writer, not a Greek writer. So this is going to give me 2 points. And then we've got, for Russia, The Heart of a Dog by Mikhail Bulgakov, which is a novella, and this originally came out in the 1920s, I think. It's another allegory, another satire with science fiction themes, and this was banned in the Soviet Union for many years. Quite controversial. And this book, which I read and reviewed recently, Oracle by Ian Watson, is going to represent Belgium, because part of the story is set within Brussels. It's kind of cheating a little bit because only a small part of the story is set within Brussels, but that doesn't matter. It's within my own rules. 2 points for that. And one more book for Europe would be The Wall, which is in my TBR, and this is by Marlon Haushofer. And this is going to represent Germany. This is a classic apocalyptic or dystopian tale. I don't know much about it, but it is in my TBR. So 1 point for that. And that completes Europe with a total of 14 countries for Europe and 34 points. Now let's move on to Africa. There's not a lot here, I'm afraid, but we've got a couple of books. We've got this book, Lagoon, by Nnedi Okorafor. I'm very much looking forward to reading this one. This author is a Nigerian-American writer, and this story is set within Nigeria, and this is quite interesting to read a story from an African perspective, a science fiction story from an African non-Western perspective, which we don't see very often. And the other book representing Africa is not by an African writer, but it's J.G. Ballard's The Crystal World, which is an interesting post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic story set within Cameroon, I think. To be honest, I was a little bit disappointed with this book, but it will give me 2 points for Cameroon, because it's set within Cameroon, and 1 point for Lagoon for Nigeria, and that will complete Africa. And let's move on to Asia. So let's start off with China. There's a few books I could choose from here, but I'm going to go for Vagabonds by Hao Jingfang, which is a very interesting story. It's got utopian elements, it's got dystopian elements, it's got very similar vibes to The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. Most of the book is set on Mars, and I think this is a very interesting read. It's a bit long, perhaps. You can see it's a bit of a chunker, but this is going to give me 3 points for China. And then for South Korea, I'm going to go for The Cabinet by Eun-Soo Kim, which I absolutely loved. It's one of my favourite books. It's got interesting sci-fi elements, some bizarre, absurd humour. I love this book. I talk about it a lot on my channel. 3 points for South Korea. For Japan, we're going to go for The Next Continent by Isui Ogawa, and this is a story about the colonization of the moon, about an engineering company who plans to set up a lunar base to allow permanent human settlement there. And it's got quite similar vibes to the Mars trilogy by Kim Stanley Robinson. It's quite hard SF in its style. So 3 points for Japan. And we also have this book, The Sleepless by Victor Manibo. So Victor Manibo is a Filipino writer who now lives in New York, and I have interviewed him for this channel, so you can check that out if you're interested. So this book can represent the Philippines, so that would be another 3 points. And finally, for Asia, I've got this book, The Mountain and the Sea. It's by Ray Naylor, who's an American writer, but much of the story is set within an island off the coast of Vietnam. So to represent Vietnam, that will give me 2 more points. Right, I think all we've got left is Australia. And I don't have any books by Australian writers, or nothing that I could think of anyway. However, Death's End by Liu Cixin is the 3rd book in the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, and part of this novel is set within Australia. I remember that much, so that will allow me 2 points for Australia. So we've got every continent covered, except for Antarctica, but I don't think there's anything I can do about that. And according to my calculations, I've put this up on Excel. I've got 27 countries in total and a score of 61 points. So I don't know if that's impressive or not, but I think it was an interesting reflection on my different science fiction books from around the world. Feel free to take this challenge yourself and see how many points you get. That's it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.